Today I want to tell you guys about what I've went through in the last week with this 1999 Jeep TJ. I want to give an update to the followers on my main channel who might have an interest in what's going on here. And I want to try to provide as much information as I possibly can in the shortest time possible for someone else who might have a Jeep like this that has a low oil pressure fault. This is my son's daily driver. We don't have an extra vehicle. He needs this to go back and forth to college, and if I have to transport him, it really puts a dent into my productivity. So I'm trying to get this going as quickly as possible without spending any money. Well, I mean, obviously, it's going to take a chunk of change to get it going, but I'm trying to minimize it or be efficient and effective with the money I spend on it. So let's go through this chronologically. A week ago, we got another repair we were doing, and we took it for a test drive, and it came up, the oil pressure was bottoming out. And I, didn't know what to make of that. I have never been in a vehicle that had a low oil pressure fault before. So we bring the Jeep home, I start doing my research. And for the last 4 days, I've done nothing but research. I've watched probably 8 hours of videos on people working on these Jeep engines, doing diagnostics, doing rebuilds, doing engine swaps. I've went to 2 local mechanics, professional mechanics. I've talked to every backyard mechanic I know, and I went to a custom Jeep shop. I've done all my research on engine swaps from different years, engine swaps with remans, full rebuilds on the engine I've got, halfway rebuilds on the engine inside of the Jeep. Tried to do all the research, find out everything I could to do the best job that I can on getting this thing going again. So let's go through it once again, just as quick as I can. So if you get a low oil pressure light, first thing you need to do is verify that it actually has low oil pressure, because it's really common for this specific model or year range of Jeep to give a low oil pressure light or have the gauge drop when it doesn't actually have low oil pressure. There are a few different things you can look at there. But first thing you need to know is, do I actually have low oil pressure, or is it telling me I have low oil pressure and that's not real? Sometimes these gauges are kind of a dummy gauge. It's like a pass-fail. If it gets below 13, it goes straight to 0. The way you test that is you take out the oil pressure sensor, screwed into the block, and you put a gauge in there. You can order the gauges. I don't know if you can buy them locally or not, but I've seen a bunch of people checking it, verifying their oil pressure. Now, if you actually have low oil pressure, I'm going to just cut to the chase and tell you there's probably about a 90% chance that your engine needs rebuilt. But it's not 100%. There's some great channels out there who have taken these engines, set them up on stands where they could run them, and swapped out multiple different oil pumps and used different oils and done some pretty thorough testing on what can be done. There's also some in-place partial rebuilds that I've seen. So first thing is, you determine that you actually have low oil pressure. Now, I didn't even buy the gauge because when we got the low oil pressure sound, it was also making a ticking sound. You could tell it actually wasn't getting oil pressure. From there, I would say you want to start with the smallest possible thing. So the first thing I would do when I get that low oil pressure indication is find out if I actually have low oil pressure. If I do have low oil pressure, I'm going to make sure that I have enough oil in the Jeep and not too much, and that I have a quality, high viscosity oil. So one reason I think this problem popped up is my son had an oil change the day before, and I think he didn't know what to tell him, and the shop used an oil that was too thin, and I really didn't realize that either. If I'd put thought into it, I would have told him to use a thicker oil. But most of the time, guys, with these old Jeeps, if they're high mileage on these 4-liter, they're running a Rotella 1540. And maybe even putting some kind of like a motor honey in it on top of that, like a Lucas oil stabilizer or something even beyond that that is a thickener. Because a thicker oil is going to help you maintain that oil pressure on a worn engine. Then you want to use a high quality oil filter, like a Wix, rather than the cheap kind of bargain basement oil filter that's probably used by the shop that my son went to. So those would be the first things. Put some fresh oil in it and some thicker oil, some high quality oil. See if you still have the problem. The next thing is changing the oil pump. I would say 90% of the time that's not going to work. But if you're looking at replacing an engine or changing the oil pump, I'd try the oil pump real quick. And that's what I set out to do. The other thing about changing the oil pump is it's going to give you a close look inside your engine to find out if you have other problems. Because to change the oil pump, you have to pull the pan. That's going to let you see the underside of the engine. It's going to let you see what kind of shavings are in your oil. So next thing I did was drop the oil pan. Now a lot of people, I watched every video I could find on dropping this oil pan, and people really made it seem difficult. And I'm no mechanic. And maybe they had a different circumstance than me, but I found it to be quite easy to get that oil pan out when a lot of people made it seem like a big deal. And for me, I had to remove 2 bolts from the exhaust, not the manifold, but the first joint down from the manifold. I removed those 2 bolts and then took it loose a little bit in the back, and I was able to tilt that down enough that when I dropped the bolts out of the pan, it came straight down, no problem at all. So that would be my piece of advice for trying to get the oil pan off. If you do pull the oil pan, make sure you take note of the orientation of all the bolts. A lot of people set up a piece of cardboard, draw the oil pan, and then poke the bolts into that drawing where they actually came from. And that's what we did. Now you might be thinking, oil pumps hardly ever go bad. Why would you even bother trying to change it? Well, I've watched some videos that showed there can be some effectiveness. If you have an engine that's got some wear in it and you're trying to get more mileage out of it, you switch to the thicker oil I've already been talking about, and you go with a Melling high flow oil pump. It's not higher pressure, but it's higher flow. And that higher flow, I've seen an engine demonstrated on another YouTube video that was able to maintain its pressure by having more flow with a thicker oil. And here is that Melling high flow oil pump. And the thing about it is, now the thing you need to know about this is it's about this much taller. And it doesn't quite have the clearance in the oil pan. So a lot of people, when they go to install this, if they're not paying attention, they may not get their oil pan closed up good enough, or they may put this into a bind or really be putting pressure on it. So you want to kind of shave the edge of this just a little bit, shape it, soften it, not where it bolts up, but on the other end where it's hitting the oil pan, and hammer that oil pan down just like a mallet and a piece of aluminum or a piece of wood. You can kind of just barely bend that oil pan down. And there are videos on that. But you cannot just, in most cases, you cannot just drop that pan, change the pump, and then put the pan back on. So that's where I was at. We were going to go thicker oil, new oil pump, and just see what we get. And there's still a slight chance that that might have worked. But once I got under it, I decided that I didn't want to go that route because there was very obvious problems in this engine. The main thing I'm seeing is you can grab a connecting rod and lift up and down and see the slop on your main bearings on the crankshaft. And to me, once I saw that, I knew that just my initial plan wasn't going to cut it. So started looking at next options. This is where I start going to mechanics. I'm in forums. I'm creating posts in Facebook groups. I'm saying, this is what I found. Do I have any options? And what I found is you can do a partial rebuild on the engine without pulling it out of the Jeep. You can actually change those main bearings by putting a screw inside of the oil fitting and then tapping it around, rotating the engine and pushing those bearings out, and then put the new ones in without taking the engine out. I talked to a guy who's done that exact job, and he says you've got a chance that you could do that and you could get another 6 months out of the engine, another year, whatever it is. There's also a chance that your crank is so scored that it's going to eat through those new bearings in a week. So next I go to the mechanic I was going to have help me with this. I said, what are your thoughts on changing these bearings? And he said he'd be interested in pulling it out and doing a quick rebuild, not machining everything down, going all the way through the engine, but just doing the things you can access the easiest for the least amount of money. And we might be able to go through this in a week and spend under $1,000 and put it back in, but it wouldn't be right. And we considered that as an option. But I wanted to compare all options. A partial rebuild, and that plan only works if you pull the engine and you don't find a whole bunch of other problems. And how far are you going to dig into it to make sure the condition of that engine, and it just keeps adding time and expense. So the next thing we're looking at are, what are my options for replacing the engine? You can get a remanufactured engine for these between $2,500 and $4,000. And then you're still going to have to pull it, and it's still not a brand new engine, but it'd be the best option. But this is a $4,000 Jeep, and really we need to be driving it ASAP. So we paid $4,000 for the Jeep, and now we're looking at, if I pay my friend hourly to help me install this, we might be $4,000 on swapping for a reman engine, and nobody has one. It might be a month to get a remanufactured engine. So then I'm looking at, can I go with a salvage yard engine? These Jeeps are so popular that when the engine blows, people don't just throw them in the junkyard like they might if this was a 99 Honda. They rebuild engines. They upgrade them. Especially if you've lifted this and you've got a custom bumper on it and you've done all this modifications to it and you've put money in it, you're going to find another engine. So these engines are in demand. People also take the 2.5 liter and upgrade it to the 4 liter. So I called every salvage yard in the nearest metro area. Then within 2 hours, you can go Kansas City, Tulsa, Springfield, Missouri, and down into Arkansas and find some larger areas. I called and I called and I called up to an 8-hour drive. I could not find, actually, I found a total of 2 engines that could possibly go in this, and we were looking at $1,500 for an engine with 190,000 miles on it, which is the same age as this one. So I was really struggling with that. Then we've got the option to do a full rebuild on this. It's going to take some time. It's going to cost a lot of money. I was about ready to pay $1,500 for a high mileage engine when I decided to go in all the local Facebook groups and all the bigger Facebook groups and ask some more questions. I found a guy in Kansas City who had, by going in these groups and posing the question, I got some better offers. One, within a couple hours of here, was a 2000 model engine for $1,000. But the guy who had the engine told me that 2000 model would go in this 1999. It will, but it requires 3 modifications that are above my pay grade. So I would have had to pay someone to help me do this upgrade on this $1,000 engine. And I was about ready to do that, and I was trying to decide between these two. Then I found my knight in shining armor. A shop in Kansas City messaged me, said $850 for a 2005 Jeep engine, 4 liter, with only 87,000 miles on it. Half the price with half the miles. I said, man, I can't pass that up, but here's the problem. I've heard there are 3 things that make it incompatible between a 99 and a 2000 to 2005. He said there are, but I do this swap all the time, and I can do those 3 modifications or show you how to do them. So I'll show you on the engine the 3 modifications. One is the 99 engine had a distributor, and the later models have individual coil packs on each spark plug. You can put your distributor on by pulling a sensor from where the distributor goes and just putting your distributor on if you get it to top dead center and you turn the distributor the right way. He explained to me how to do that. Then he put a water pump from a 99 in place drilled and tapped a hole so that my water pump would fit correctly on this engine. Number 3 is the bracket for the alternator. On mine uses 2 bolts from the side. On the later model, it bolts onto a single hole that's turned the other way. And so you have to manufacture a little custom bracket. He offered to make that bracket for me for free. This guy is phenomenal. I could not believe the extent he was going to sell me an engine for half of what anyone else had, when mostly I couldn't even find engines available. So this guy is going to get a huge shout out on the main channel. I went up there, drove 2.5 hours, got the engine, got it loaded up. I was getting ready to leave. I was telling him that I make YouTube videos for a living. And the guy says, you know, I could have put this engine in for you for $600. So wait a minute. My plan here was that I was going to do this myself. But because there are just a couple things that I was concerned about, I was going to pay my friend hourly to help me with it. And I was figuring between $500 and $800 I was going to pay my friend to help me do it. And he said for $600 he would do the swap, make the bracket, make the adjustments, and let me film it. So I'm going to make the best engine swap video that exists on YouTube for a Jeep TJ. I'm almost guaranteeing that video is going to be great, because this guy has a shop set up. They do engine swaps, multiple per week. He's got it down, and he says he's going to let me film it. All I've got to do is ask the right questions and edit the video properly. And so my cost on this is $850 for the engine, $600 for the swap, puts me at $1,450. It was going to be $1,488 exact price for that engine with twice the mileage. So I feel like this is one of those situations where I had a problem, I needed to find a solution, and that solution just miraculously appeared to be at my benefit at just the right time. And I feel like in life it's amazing how often that happens. I'm just shocked by how often that happens. Like, I'm a blessed individual, and I try to make sure I maintain that mindset, because I could say woe is me like I did in the last video, that it's a bummer that I've had 2 vehicles break down and my problem with my roof on the same day. But instead I want to think about it like my son's going to end up with a lower mileage engine than he ever started off with at a budget we can afford. And then what I want to do on the YouTube channel is take this engine that we pull out of here, and over time make a video series completely rebuilding that engine and having a perfect, like new condition engine ready to swap back into this Jeep. So I'm excited about the resolution I've got on it. I appreciate you taking time to watch this video. I'll put links to more of our videos on the screen, and I'll see you next time.